The stars above Tenochtitlan did not shine. They stared. To the ancient Mexica, the night sky was not wonder. It was warning. And nowhere did that warning burn brighter than above the Templo Mayor, where stone, blood, and starlight converged into a system of control so exact it bordered on possession. You've seen temples, you've read of gods, but you've never truly seen the skies of the Templo Mayor. Beneath that towering dual pyramid, split between Tlaloc, god of rain, and Huitzilopochtli, god of war, lay alignments no calendar dares record. On the equinox, shadows fell exactly between the shrines, cutting the temple into halves of blood and water. At solstice, the sun's last light struck the obsidian disk atop the war god's shrine, reflecting the heavens downward into a basin shaped like a human heart. And when Venus rose, not in beauty, but in silence, every priest turned westward, not in awe, but fear. Because to the Aztecs, Venus was not a planet. It was a warrior, a twin of fire, a herald of sacrifice. The cult of Venus was not public. It was hidden beneath the temple. In chambers lined with mica and mirrorstone, its priests calculated the heliacal rising of the morning star with terrifying accuracy. They called her Tlahuizcalpantecutli, the Lord of the House of Dawn, but not in reverence, in defense. Every appearance of Venus was a countdown, a signal, a requirement, and every time she rose, someone had to fall. They called it a calendar. But it was never meant to measure time. It was a contract, a cosmic ledger, a pact sealed in cycles and blood. The Tonalpohualli, the sacred count of days, was not a tool of agriculture or administration. It was a divine language encrypted in glyphs, numbers, and elemental lords. Every 260-day rotation was a conversation between humans and gods. And hidden in its intersections were consents, agreements made not by voice but by offering. Only the priests of highest rank were permitted to interpret the hidden days, those on which the sun itself blinked. These weren't days to celebrate, they were days to obey. It was said that within certain glyph combinations, names of people would appear, not written, but revealed. And those whose names surfaced on these cursed alignments were summoned. They weren't accused, they weren't warned. They were honored, and then prepared. The calendar never lied, and those chosen were believed to have consented long before birth. This wasn't divination, it was execution by cosmic contract, and the ones who read it feared what they might see next. When the sun darkened, empires trembled. To the modern eye, an eclipse is a celestial coincidence. But to the Aztecs, it was the sky itself speaking or screaming. The sun was not a ball of light. It was a god in motion, a warrior in eternal combat, and every eclipse was a sign that he was losing. Panic followed darkness. Trade stopped. Songs ended. Warriors wept. Pregnant women were hidden underground. Children were silenced. The priests had known in advance, they always did. But still, they performed the rite of reinforcement, a sacrifice carried out at the precise moment of umbra, when the sun vanished from sight. The blood had to fall before the first rays returned, or the contract between sun and people would be broken. There are rumors, in glyphs smuggled into colonial texts, that one eclipse sparked a mass ritual, thousands, voluntary, driven by fear and obedience. The temples overflowed, the priests were overwhelmed. For 3 hours the steps of Templo Mayor were red, and as the shadow passed, the sun returned. But something had changed. The glyphs that once marked the solar path began to shift subtly in new inscriptions, as if something else had noticed the blood and accepted it. Not all stars were equal. The Aztecs feared some more than others, none more than the Pleiades. To most ancient cultures, they were just a cluster and beautiful, distant. But to the priests of Tenochtitlan, they were watchers, judges. And during the new fire ceremony, every 52 years, when the calendar wheel completed its sacred cycle, all fires across the empire were extinguished. The night was made absolute. and the sky was watched. Only when the Pleiades crossed the zenith at midnight would the priests declare, "The world will continue." If they failed to appear, the world would end. This wasn't myth. It was protocol, a cosmic audit. Scrolls carved in obsidian, hidden deep in temple foundations, described the binding of the stars, a theory that the gods themselves were bound by this stellar alignment, that the Pleiades weren't just a sign, they were a lock, and if they were ever broken or shifted, the gods would be free or destroyed. One ritual recounts a priest trembling violently before the Pleiades appeared. He screamed, "The rope is fraying! They are waking!" He died moments later, blood pouring from his ears. The Pleiades rose. The fires were relit. But that year, the sun rose late, by seconds, and the priests took note. In the cracks of the stone, hidden from sight, the real tools were kept. While public ceremonies distracted crowds with incense and chants, the true observers worked in silence, beneath the temples, inside narrow chambers carved with unnatural precision. These were not places for worship. They were instruments, walls polished to obsidian reflection, ceilings aligned to stellar paths, slits in the stone that framed only a single star on a single night, once every few decades. The altares ocultos, hidden altars, were not for sacrifice. They were for observation, but not passive. These were designed to receive something, signals, patterns, frequencies no voice could speak, no ear could hear. Only the trained priest, lying motionless in the cavity, could feel the vibration of starlight on his skin, and sometimes the stars moved. Not visibly, not to the eye, but the angle of entry, the temperature in the stone, the way shadow bled into geometry, shifted. In one chamber beneath the Templo Mayor, a single glyph was carved inverted in the blind corner of the ceiling. No one could see it, but its shape mirrored a constellation that should not have existed, not in that era. The priests called these shifts Chicotla-Zotla, the sky's betrayal. But betrayal of what? Of the calendar or of the gods? In the heart of the sacred precinct stood the sunstone, not a calendar, not a monument, but a message carved in fire. Most see its glyphs as timekeeping, days, deities, cycles. But the Aztecs called it Tonatiuh's face, the visage of a god in agony, his mouth open not in scream, but in hunger. It was placed flat, not upright, because it was never meant to be viewed. It was meant to look up. The stone, when struck by sunlight during the zenith, refracted light into radial lines that aligned with points around the temple, each one leading to a shrine, a chamber, or an execution platform. It was a solar compass, but also a diagram of control. The outer rings of the stone depict the previous worlds, the 5 suns, each destroyed, each replaced. But some priests believed these weren't past eras. They were phases of awareness. Layers of deception peeled back only through blood, time, and astronomical precision. The 5th sun, our current age, was not a beginning. It was a cage. And the Tonatiuh in the center was not smiling. He was waiting. Because when the sun speaks through stone, it does not speak in light. It speaks in gravity. And the priests were listening. The 5 suns, the cosmic ages of creation and destruction, were not just myth. They were prophecy embedded in astronomy, encoded through geometry and ritual, reinforced by sacrifice. Each sun was a world lost, not metaphorically, literally. The first, devoured by jaguars; the second, drowned; the third, burned; the fourth, torn by winds; and the 5th, this one, destined to end by earthquakes and silence. But the scrolls tell more. Fragments buried beneath Templo Mayor suggest that these suns were more than eras. They were resets, controlled collapses. And hidden within the cycles were instructions, sequences of sacrifice, fasting, celestial observation, designed not to appease the gods, but to guide them, like levers pulled in ritual, like code. Some priests whispered that the 5th sun wasn't the last. that a sixth would come, not with destruction but with memory, that those who survived the fifth would awaken remembering the prior cycles, remembering what had been erased, remembering that each sun was a correction, not of the world, but of humanity. The stone glyphs warn those who remember must not speak, for remembrance is rebellion, and so they remained silent, watching the sky, waiting for the tremor beneath their feet to begin again. But what if the stars did more than speak? What if they demanded? The Aztecs did not offer sacrifice as plea, they offered as payment, debt. The cosmos was not benevolent, it was hungry. And when the stars aligned in specific ways, particularly Venus, the Pleiades, and eclipses overlapping with sacred numbers, the priests declared a time of obligation. The rituals turned darker. Blood was not symbolic, it was currency. The life force within it was seen as astral fuel, something the gods required to keep the world rotating, the sun burning, the seasons turning. But not all sacrifices were public. Some were done at night, in silence, in remote temples marked only by starlight. And they were specific. Children born under certain omens, warriors who dreamed of death before battle, virgins who heard songs from beneath the lake. One chilling account, preserved by Nahua poets after the conquest, speaks of a ritual where blood was dripped onto stone glyphs corresponding to stars, and the glyphs shifted, as if the offering had been accepted. The stars above did not change, but the priest's eyes did. One witness said they no longer looked at the heavens, they looked through them, and that was when the rain stopped. For 13 days. Tenochtitlan was not ruled only from its palaces. It was governed from above, not metaphorically, but literally. The priesthood and noble class understood something the masses did not. The stars were tools of power. Astrology was not superstition, it was surveillance, control, timing. Ceremonies were not spontaneous. They were executed with mathematical precision when planetary alignments reached thresholds unknown to the commoner. A coronation, only if Venus had vanished. A war declaration, only if Mars crossed the smoking mirror. Even executions were scheduled by the sky. But beneath this precision, there was another layer, a conspiracy among the elite, a celestial manipulation. They owned instruments never shown to the public, bronze discs that tracked lunar phases, shadow rods that revealed solstice shifts, codices sealed under obsidian slabs containing sequences of rituals tied to eclipses and the sacred count. The priests would not act until the sky consented, but what if they weren't just following? What if they were directing, using sacrifice, chant, and alignment as a way not to worship, but to command? The glyph for ruler and the glyph for sun mover were nearly identical. And some believe that the true function of Tenochtitlan's highest shrine was not to receive the heavens, but to reshape them. So what truly was the sky to the Aztecs? Not a canvas, not a mystery, but a machine. Vast, breathing, sacred, and dangerous. Each star a glyph, each eclipse a voice, each sacrifice a gear in a mechanism older than memory. The heavens above Tenochtitlan were not passive. They were not watched. They were read, interpreted, and sometimes corrected. Because if the gods once gave man the calendar, the fire, the seasons, they also gave him one terrifying gift, the ability to interfere. And so the priests became engineers of time. Their temples, observatories, their rituals, recalibrations, their silence, complicity in a game far more complex than survival. The sky to them was not fate, it was code. And the blood was not for the gods. It was the ink. The conspiracy was never hidden. It was painted in stone, offered in chants, aligned in architecture. And still today, when Venus rises before the dawn, when the Pleiades cross the sky in perfect form, when the sun vanishes and a hush falls upon the earth, the code stirs, the machine waits, and the stars remember.